And then the pictures stopped. That night I went home with pictures of Anya. The next day I was bold enough to take 8 photographs. Before I went to sleep, I would take out these photos, this growing deck of the dead, and whisper their names. Anya, Herschel, Gerda, Chaim, Elias still wailing after his bris, Zanla on her wedding day. As long as I remembered them, they were still here. At night, Daria couldn't sleep. The pain was so bad. Minka, she whispered, shivering, if I die, you won't have a picture of me to save. I knew her tooth was infected. Her breath smelled as if she was rotting from the inside out, and her cheek was swollen to twice its size. I hugged her back to my front, giving her whatever body heat I still had. The next day, Daria woke with a red face, her skin on fire. I managed to set her beside me at the sorting bench. By the end of the day, though, I had not found a single item that would work to ease her pain. And then, in one leather satchel, slipped into a torn silk lining, was a fountain pen. My hand closed around it with an ache. I could see myself curled in the window of my father's bakery, writing my book. The story flowed like blood from my hand. I didn't even know if there was ink inside. To test it, I pressed the nib against the numbers that had been burned into my left forearm. The ink became a Rorschach blot, covering up what they had done to me. I slipped the pen into my jacket. This was for Daria, not for me. That night, I enlisted the help of another girl to prop Daria up at the evening appel. She could barely stand by the time we were sent back to the block 2 hours later. Her forehead was so hot it blistered against my hand. Daria, I said, you have to trust me. She shook her head, near delirium. Leave me alone. I will, after I knock out that stupid tooth. My comment cut through whatever haze she was in. Like hell you will. Shut up and open your mouth, I muttered. But when I went to grab her chin, she reared away. Is it gonna hurt? Yes. If I had any gas, I'd give it to you. Daria started to laugh. Gas, she wheezed. You don't have any gas. I realized how silly this was, given the mass extermination that was going on just yards away from our hut. Suddenly, I was laughing too. It was inappropriate and awful, and we could not stop. When we finally could control ourselves, we had our emaciated arms around each other, the gangly limbs of 2 tangled praying mantises. If you can't anesthetize me, Daria said, then distract me, okay? I could sing, I suggested. You want to cause more pain? Tell me a story. I took the pen out of my pocket and tried to clean it as best I could. Then I looked at my best friend, my only friend. I couldn't tell her a memory from our childhood because that would be too upsetting. I couldn't spin a yarn about our future because we barely had one. There was really only one story I knew by heart, the one I'd been writing for years. My father trusted me with the details of his death, I began. Anya, he would say, no whiskey at my funeral. I want the finest blackberry wine. No weeping, mind you, just dancing. And when they lower me into the ground, I want a fanfare of trumpets and white butterflies. A character, that was my father. He was the village baker, and every day, in addition to the loaves that he would make for the town, he would create a single roll for me that it was as unique as it was delicious. A twist like a princess's crown, dough mixed with sweet cinnamon and the richest chocolate. The secret ingredient, he said, was his love for me, and this made it taste better than anything else I had ever eaten. I opened Daria's mouth gently and positioned the pen at the root of her swollen gum. I lifted a stone I had pried from the latrines. I looked down to see Daria finally relaxed, caught in the gauze of my words, but I realized too that the whole hut had gone quiet. All the women were listening to me. So I told them of the people of the village who were on edge. There seemed to be a monster in their midst. My father trusted me with the details of his death, I said. But in the end, I was too late. Swiftly, I smashed the stone into the pen. The sound that Daria made was unearthly. Her eyes were bright red, the blood vessels having burst. I'm sorry, I cried. Minka, she said, through the blood, through her tears. She grabbed my hand and I realized she was trying to give me something. In her palm was a broken, rotted tooth. It was Daria who told me to write it down. You never know, maybe one day you'll be famous. I laughed at that. More likely, the story will die with me. But stories outlive their writers all the time. I think in the end, that's why I did it. There would be no photograph of me for someone to steal or to memorize. There was no family at home anymore to think of me. If I had to die in this hellhole, maybe someone else would survive and tell their children the story a girl had told at night in the block. Fiction's like that once it's released into the world. Contagious, persistent. It becomes infectious, spreading from the person who created it to the person who listens and passes it on. Ironically, it was the photographs that made it possible. One day, I dropped the deck of faces on the floor. Hurrying to gather them again, I realized some were face down. On the white cardboard of one photo, I read Moshe, 10 months. Someone had written that. It was a small square, smaller than what I was used to, but it was paper, and I had dozens of them and a fountain pen. I wrote until the fountain pen bled itself dry, until as much of my story as possible was scratched in tiny, careful German prose on the backs of over 100 faces of the dead. Raus! One minute I was asleep, dreaming that I had been brought to a room with a table a kilometer long on which there were heaps of food, and I had to eat my way from one end to the other before I'd be allowed to leave. The next, several guards filled the block looking for contraband. Sometimes we knew about an inspection. In my bunk, buried under the straw, were the deck of photos with my story written out. A girl who had hidden a radio was dragged outside. My heart started up like a machine gun. I saw the Bluchaltesta's hand close around the photographs, which I had secured with a thread pulled from the hem of my uniform. Daria stepped forward. They belong to me. My jaw dropped. She's lying. She doesn't speak German. I was hauled out of the block. It was pouring outside, and the wind raged like a dragon. Standing in the center of the courtyard, rain pelting his wool uniform, was the SS officer I called Herr Tremor. There was no shudder in his grasp as he lifted a whip and brought it down on the back of the girl who had hidden the radio. She lay face down in a puddle. After each blow, he yelled at her to get up, and each time she did, he struck her again. I would be next. As we approached Herr Tremor, he looked up, the rain sleeting across his features. His eyes were like glass. I am not done here. Should we wait, Schutzhaftlagerführer? Asked the guard. I have no intention of standing around all day in this pissing rain because some animals cannot follow rules, he said. I lifted my chin. Very precisely, in German, I said, Ich bin kein Tier. I am not an animal. His gaze narrowed on mine. He lifted his right hand, the one holding the whip, and cracked it across my cheekbone. Da irrst du dich. You are mistaken. I fell to my knees in the mud, holding one hand up to my cheek. The tail of the whip had cut a gash under my eye. The girl on the ground beside me caught my gaze. Her flesh was peeled back like the petals of a rose. Behind me, I could hear conversation. The guards were telling someone else, someone knew what my infraction was. This new officer stepped over me. Schutzhaftlagerführer, he said. You are busy here. With your permission, perhaps I can help? I could only see the back of his uniform and his gloved hands. His boots were so shiny I stared, wondering how he could walk through so much mud without getting them filthy. Herr Tremor shrugged and turned back to the girl on the ground beside me. The other officer walked off. I was hauled upright and taken across the compound to an office. There was a large wooden desk and many filing cabinets and an ornate chair, the kind you always found lawyers sitting in. In that chair was the officer in charge of Canada. And spread out in front of him were all of my photographs flipped onto their bellies to reveal my story. Leave us, he said to the guard. So, you speak German. My eyes flickered toward the photographs. I studied in school. You realize you stole material from the Reich? I'm sorry, it was a mistake. He raised his brows. It was a mistake to willfully steal something? No, it was a mistake to think the photographs didn't matter to the Reich. He opened his mouth and snapped it shut. He couldn't admit that the photographs were valuable because that was tantamount to admitting that those who were killed had worth. But he couldn't admit that the photos were meaningless because doing so would dilute his argument for punishing me. That's not the point, he said finally. The point is they do not belong to you. The officer picked up one of the pictures. This story, where is the rest of it? I imagined the guards ransacking the block, trying to find more photographs with writing. When they didn't, would they just start hurting people until someone gave them the answer they wanted? I haven't written it yet, I confessed. This surprised him. I realized he assumed I was simply recounting a tale I'd read elsewhere. I wasn't supposed to be intelligent enough to create something like this. You, he said. You made this up. We were speaking in German. We were having a conversation about writing, as if at any moment he might not take out his pistol and shoot me in the head. Most girls write of love. You chose to write about a beast, he said thoughtfully. You know, your choice of topic reminds me of the Dinestra. You've heard of it? Was this a test? A trick? The ancient Greeks, which is what I studied in school, wrote of the Dinestra. It had the head of a lion and the body of a man. It could speak all the languages of the human race, which, as you might imagine, the officer said dryly, came in handy. But the Dinestra had one peculiar trait. It would save the severed head of its victim, sit beside it, and weep. He fixed his gaze on me. Why do you think that was? I swallowed. Perhaps some monsters still have a conscience. The officer's nostrils flared. He came around the desk and I immediately cowered, throwing up my arm to block the blow. You realize I could make an example of you, publicly flog you like the prisoner the Schutzhaft Lagerfeuer was punishing earlier, or kill you. Tears sprang to my eyes. As it turned out, I was not too proud to plead for my meager life. Please, don't. I'll do anything. The officer hesitated. Then tell me, he said, what happens next? Thank you.